Welcome to another edition of our unique NUFC podcast. The Toon head to the capital this weekend, and it'll be a very tough outing against an informed Fulham and Mitrović. So who better to have as today's special guest than a legend on Tyneside and, of course, on the north banks of the River Thames. Welcome to Black and White with Arab News. Today's legend, let's meet one of our own, Arab News sports editor Ali Khaled. Ali, can we hit pause on the broken record that we seem to have on here every week? Another draw last time out.
Yep, I know I've been saying it week after week, and I know a couple of our guests as well said, it's no need to panic, and it's not, no great concern. The team's playing well. I agree with that, and I know I've been a little bit critical about all those draws. It's not so much, concern as in terms of form or even in terms of position in the table. It's more, that Newcastle now are playing really well and have higher aspirations. So, really, look, it should be like a lot of those draws could have easily been turned into wins, with slightly better finishing. Of course, I mean, I am stating the obvious here, but the point that I kept making over and over again is that, if Callum Wilson's not playing, and obviously Aleksandar Isak's new, he scored once, but he's injured now. There needs to be contributions from the rest of the team, from the wide players. Say Maximin has been playing really well, but you'd expect him, probably Almiron. I know they're not. Finishing is not like the strongest point, but you want more contributions. You want more goal contributions and assists from midfield, and with Bruno Guimaraes, I expect that to increase.
A collective input. I have to say though, given that where we were sort of disappointed against Crystal Palace, I was quite relieved in the last outing. I thought we were lucky to get that draw. Anyway, to welcome back to Supermac himself, Malcolm Macdonald. Malcolm, speaking of, we spoke about Newcastle there, but speaking of another of your old teams. Got to be impressed with Fulham and their start, by the way.
Yes, very impressed. Some of the football they're playing is absolutely terrific. It's such a huge change to what we saw from them 2 years ago. They spent, back then, they spent a record summer spend of 115 million. And it just didn't improve their side whatsoever, and they looked absolutely dreadful. And I think Newcastle played the last game of the season, didn't they, at Craven Cottage, and absolutely walked all over them, beat them 4-0, and of course they were already relegated by then. This time around, they've spent a fair old sum of money through the summer. But you can see that it has been well spent this time, very well spent, and they are looking to have very much an all-round side. They're still a bit lax at the back. But when they go forward, by heavens, they really do look good. And Newcastle are going to have to be seriously on their toes at all positions up and down the pitch. And of course, you mentioned Mitrović. Yes, he surprised me a little bit because I thought that he was nothing more than a circus act from everything I saw of him at Newcastle. And in fact, I became so impatient. I just had, I didn't want to know the fella. He wanted to play to the crowd, and he was more like a bullfighter than a footballer. And so now he's knuckled down. And he's playing the game how it should be played, and he's showing himself to be obviously using his bulk and his height and what have you, and he's knocking defenders about. But at the same time, he has got skill, and he's got an ability to finish. I still have one or two doubts about him. So,
do you think he's growing up, Malcolm? Do you think that's maybe it? He's growing up?
Yeah, I think so. I think that somebody sat him down and explained what the game is truly about, and how he has got to adapt to the game rather than the game adapt to him.
It's fascinating to hear, because you're right. He was a cult figure more than a great player.
Yeah. That he wanted to get the crowd on his side by posturing.
Yeah.
The best way to get a crowd on your side is stick the ball in the net. And that's what he didn't realise at Newcastle.
Absolutely.
And it's because it's not, you don't just want the crowd on your side, you want your teammates on your side, you want the management on your side, and and the best way to get all of that is to score regularly, and he just failed to do that at Newcastle.
Looks like he's doing it now. Ali, some stats for you. Fulham have won 12 of their 28 Premier League games against Newcastle, drawn 5, lost 11, more than any other side in the competition. Also 12, but that was against Bolton Wanderers, who are no longer with us in the Premier League. However, the Toon have won their last 2 at Craven Cottage, Ali. But as Malcolm says, I think AK's going to be a different kettle of fish this time out.
I do. I mean, I do like my statistics, Pete, as you know, but I think sometimes statistics like that are borderline meaningless, really, if they're taken over like a period of a couple of decades, and like the last performance was like a few years ago. I think far more important is current form and how Fulham are playing at the moment. Malcolm just mentioned that, they're really attacking because, the defense can be a little bit, suspect. But they are really countering that by going all out attack. They did it against Liverpool in the first game of the season when they were absolutely brilliant against Liverpool. And
they were absolutely.
And they've had 3-2 wins. The last one against Nottingham Forest was fun. I watched that. That was another excellent performance. They beat Brentford 3-2 as well. In fact, the only 2 defeats they've had have come against Arsenal and Tottenham. Both 2-1s, if I remember correctly, and so 2 high flying teams. So overall, their level of performance has been excellent. I think that's far more of a concern to Newcastle than sort of like I think the historical performances. I think it's going to be tough, as Malcolm said. Some of the games that we recently said Newcastle should have won when they drew. I think this is going to be a tougher one.
I think it is, Malcolm. Another thing to add to your brilliant summary of Fulham is, let's talk about Marco Silva. He's a top coach, isn't he? He could be the difference as well. Keep that side in the Premier League this season. He's got experience.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. He looks at his players and works out how is the best way to play as a side to get the very best out of each individual. So all the time, he gets the teammates to play for an individual, to play to an individual's strengths rather than weaknesses. And so I think he's a very good coach, I have to say. I've liked what he's done beforehand, but I also am becoming more impressed even with him now, with what he's doing at Fulham. And they're an exciting side to watch. They really are. And you think, right, well, what Newcastle are going to have to do if they're going to compete on a serious basis with Fulham is they've got to score goals. And this is what they're struggling to do just at the moment. I would dearly love to hear that Wilson is fit and he can play up front, and Isak can play just off him. But Isak has been having to play in that Wilson role with his back to goal, and that's not his game at all. That really isn't Isak's game. That's Wilson's game. And so I'm dying to see how they mix together to create a performance. And hopefully it's down at Craven Cottage tomorrow. That would be lovely. Or rather, on Saturday. Sorry, not
Saturday.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, look, literally, it's a massive game. But again, as Malcolm says quite rightly, Ali, it's going to be a huge return for Wilson if he is fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Sorry, Malcolm, go ahead.
No. I was really just agreeing with.
Absolutely.
With what Peter was saying.
Pete, I mean, we know his value to the team from last year, and even like recently, I've heard quite a few people saying that, had he been fit and firing, and he would be, someone that England will be looking at right now to take to the World Cup. I think the only thing that stands against him is his injury record. So I mean, you can imagine. I mean, his value over the last year has been absolutely huge. He gives the team a focal point, of course, as Malcolm said. Having him back, I think, and having Bruno as well, back and settled in the middle, could be the difference. Could prompt those goals that we're talking about.
Sure. Just on what you were saying there, Ali, I think that what Southgate will have very much in mind when it comes to Wilson is that the World Cup is a hell of a lot of games all in a very short period, all cramped together. And that is not Wilson's style. He can't do a lot of games in a short period. And so I think that Southgate might say, I think he would be a bit too much of a liability injury-wise to get the best out of him in that many games. Unless, of course, he says, I think he will be a good player to have on the bench so that when we need a goal, I can bring him on and he can get us back into the game, which he will do. I think that he has a really rare knack of just being able to get into that little bit of space just at the right time as the ball arrives. And his finishing is absolutely terrific, and there's nothing flash about him. He's not going to get goals which really wow a crowd for excitement. He gets goals just on a regular basis, which are absolute bread and butter. And so he is vitally important, and Newcastle really, I think, are desperate to have this man staying fit.
Absolutely. Go on, Ali.
I just want to add to that, about the bread and butter goals. One of my favorite goals of Newcastle's from last season was against Arsenal. I think late on in the season there was a foul throw, and Newcastle got it back. And had just brilliant move down the left, and when the cross came in, Wilson got as he does, went near post for it. It actually ended up being an own goal, but the whole move was great, and I think Wilson doing what he usually does prompted that own goal, and he's very good at that, nipping ahead of the defender, getting onto the near post. He's brilliant at doing that.
Yeah, he knows where to be, doesn't he, Malcolm?
Yes, he does, and also that you hear of forwards will talk of finding space. Now, what actually is space? Is it just stood where there's nobody anywhere near you? Well, for Wilson, it isn't. Space is that if he can get just half an inch in front or ahead of an opponent, that's space to him, because all he needs is just to get his toe to it and poke it over the line. And he's very good at that, so he's not looking for acres. He's just looking for that quarter of an inch even, just to get in front and get that one vital touch. And I can't think of there's nobody else in this country that is as good a one-touch finisher as him. And that's why, dearly, Newcastle need him to stay fit, and England would love to have him for a month staying fit.
Your good pal John Gibson pointed that out about Callum Wilson. He said, ask John Stones. He said he made him look like Gray's Monument in that game against Man City, which he nipped in ahead of Stones on a couple of occasions.
Yes, he did.
It was brilliant. And you're right, Newcastle need him desperately. Okay, Ali, the Newcastle United Hall of Fame has expanded. It's now risen to a membership of 29, and at the Newcastle United Foundations Awards, what a mouthful that is, ceremony dinner held at St James's Park just this week. 2 new members were added to our very own Supermac. Malcolm's in there, of course. John Beresford and Terry McDermott were added, Ali. Now, am I right in thinking that Terry McDermott is one of your favourite players?
He is one of my favourite players. You know, so when I keep saying every week, I support Liverpool. I started supporting Liverpool in the late 70s, where he was part of that magnificent midfield with Graham Souness and Jimmy Case and Ray Kennedy. I mean, it was just like the legendary Liverpool midfield, which won the European Cup. He scored in the first European Cup final. I think those years from about 77 to 82, when McDermott was at Liverpool, he was just one of the best players, one of England's best players, I think. He was an England regular. And you and I were talking about it the other day, and he was just brilliant at volleying the ball. He just had that superb skill of volleying the ball, and just was involved in arguably Liverpool's greatest ever team, alongside Dalglish and David Johnson, and then Ian Rush later. And loved him playing for Liverpool. And obviously, like afterwards, he went back to Newcastle. And am I right in saying he played in the '74 Cup final for Newcastle?
Yes.
Yeah. Alongside
did.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I played with Terry for about it would have been about 4 years, and it just showed the remarkable shrewd eye of Joe Harvey, that he took Terry Hibbett from Bury way down in the divisions and introduced him to us at St James Park, and he just made that huge step up of about 3 divisions, and he was an instant hit with Newcastle. He could run all day long, absolutely all day. His fitness was supreme. He was very, very athletic, but he was a terrific passer of the ball, which made him ideal for Liverpool, because it was pass and move, pass and move, pass and move. And that's Terry McDermott all over. And he was super to play with. He could get good crosses in when wide, but also he would look to play through the opposition and look for little 1-2s, and you knew always if he knocked it to you, he was going to be running just beyond you, and if you were able just to get the little flick that would just go round the corner of you in the centre half, then and he would be on it. And I think that he was scoring, I would think, from midfield about 12, 13, 14 goals a season, which was a terrific return. Absolutely terrific.
Brilliant. Love Terry Matt. One of my heroes as well in his second spell in the promotion season. Malcolm, I wanted to stay with you because the Chronicle did their best to get everyone's opinion in the Northeast this week. They put their 1960s present to I'll try that again. They put out their 1960s to present day Newcastle United best 11. Shay Givens in there. There's quite David Craig's in there. Frank Clark's in there. Up front, they've gone with Keegan and Shearer. Now, in this household, I can tell you that Reading Senior had Supermac straight in there, and he said Keegan wouldn't have played straight up top anyway. He would have been what we would call a false nine now. So he disagreed with that. So he said, you can tell Malcolm from me, he's in the starting 11. I said, I'm sure he'd be chuffed at that. But it did get me thinking, Ali, because you know you're new to the Northeast vibe, although you've known the team for a long time. But you've seen already what this has had, this effect. It's great from the Chronicle to get the fans buzzing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the team, and I don't know. I mean, obviously, like a lot of the people at the Chronicle and Newcastle fans will know a lot more than me, and certainly, I'm not going to argue some of the players that I didn't really get to watch myself and all that. But the team is missing Paul Gascoigne, is missing Chris Waddle. Again, you and I discussed this. I mean, is this because maybe they had their most famous years after Newcastle? That's a possibility, although I think Waddle would certainly have a case. And obviously, I mean, in the spirit of Aussie Ardiles, I'd just put 5 in midfield and 3 up front, get Malcolm up top, like to lead the attack, and stick in the Waddle as well.
Well, I think that's what I did. I did mine, and again, I can only. Because
we spoke about it all last night, so I want to hear what your 11
I thought you'd
RP.
never ask, Ali. I thought you'd never ask. So basically, mine's based on. I started going to watch Newcastle in 1984, so I can only base it on 1984 onwards. But I went with Shay Given. I took Warren Barton at fullback. I took Colaccini and Glenn Roeder as my 2 central defenders. I took Jose Enrique at left back. Sorry to Robbie Elliott and John Beresford. No doubt they'll be WhatsApping me later. I took David Batty in the holding role. And then I just went all out attack in midfield. I've got Gaza, Peter Beardsley. I've got Kevin Keegan off the front 2. And up front, I've gone with Andy Cole and Alan Shearer. So no doubt I'll get battered on Twitter later when this comes out. But that's my team and I'm sticking to it.
Good shout on Andy Cole. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, I'd agree on that as well, Ali.
Yeah, superb for Newcastle.
And again, people say, they talked about Gaza saying, his definitely his best years were at Spurs, but he still put in 168 appearances for Newcastle. And a pal of mine asked me why Jonathan Woodgate wasn't in my side, and I said probably because he's injured and he only played 28 times for the team, so Woodgate's not in there. But it is fascinating, isn't it, Malcolm? And it's a great way to engage the fans, isn't it, to ask them what their all-time lineup is.
Sure, it is, but when you think that Newcastle United, good heavens above, they've been playing football for almost 140 years now. There is, for example, I don't think there's anybody alive who saw the great goal scorer from back in the 1930s. And Hughie Gallagher, he was 5'5", and he scored a tally of goals that left Alan Shearer and myself embarrassed. But of course, there's nobody around now to remind us of him. So, yeah, and it's even getting too long now to say, okay, well, what's the greatest side since the Second World War? And really, when you think of Newcastle United's history, you can find a great side from the noughties, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, and so on and so forth. And perhaps that's what they should do next time.
I think they should.
The team of the decade from each decade.
We'll be popping it up on Twitter later, so I'll open the floodgates, no doubt. Listen, Malcolm,
yes.
Before we go, I've got to get a score prediction from you for the weekend, as we do with all our guests. So give us a score for your old clubs, Fulham and Newcastle.
Well, I think there's going to be goals in this one. I really do. And Newcastle are going to have to, in the goal stakes, stay at least with Fulham in the way that they go about it. And Fulham do get a bit lax in a game. that they'll go ahead, but they always leave the door open a bit at the back. So you've got to be very alive in getting back into the game. So Newcastle, you've got to score where you haven't been doing so of late. So I'll go for 2-2.
Listen, it's been splendid to see you as always. Absolutely brilliant. Last word with you, Ali, as our sport editor of Arab News. And listen, you've been bugging me about this, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to throw you a question as well to end with. So you're telling me that you're mugging up on your Newcastle knowledge. You're doing very well, of course. But I've got a quiz question for you. You started out with Leicester City before a move to Derby County. He left there in 1994 to sign for Newcastle, where he lasted for 3 seasons, only 36 Premiership games before being shipped off to West Ham. Later, he had spells with Brighton, Rushden and Aldershot. Who is it?
Kitson.
Got it. He's got it again, so I'm going to have to come up with Paul Kitson.
So it was
Paul Kitson.
Oh, really? Paul Kitson, my word.
And Paul had a heck of a job on Malcolm, if you remember, because Coley had just left and he had to step into to his shoes at Gallagher. So, a bit of a nightmare. But well done, Ali. Yeah, your knowledge.
I was struggling.
Very
I
good.
was struggling with the when you got. I was thinking from Derby, but then when you mentioned West Ham, I got it. I remembered, yeah.
And a prediction from you, Ali, for the weekend.
Right, I've been whinging about all those draws, but I'm going to go with Malcolm on this one. I think it's going to be another draw, and because I think Fulham are playing very well, I don't think Newcastle will go like all out attack. I think he's still going to keep his shape, and not lose is the first priority. So I'm going to go for 1-1.
Okay, great stuff. I've heard a little whisper that Mitrović may be carrying an injury, might not feature. If that's the case, I'm going to go for a Newcastle narrow 1-0 win. But that's because it's midweek and it's not the weekend yet. So all that remains is for me to thank you all for listening. And, of course, our legendary guest, Malcolm Macdonald. And we'll see you again next time on Black and White with Arab News. How are the lads?